All right. Hello and welcome to Wholesaling Out of the Box. My name is Ashley Little and I'm joined today by Shawn Cohen, Kaylee Body, and Cameron Peters. And we're going to be talking about Chapter 6 of Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Chris was an FBI negotiator for 24 years before he retired and started the Black Swan Group to help businesses learn how to negotiate better. And, I lost my place. Shawn has been a fan of the book for a while now and has recommended it to everyone that has come through our company. He regularly references it with us and uses these techniques with our buyers and our sellers. So without further ado, Shawn, take it away.
Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about a few different things in chapter 6 that are really good here. So we're talking about deadlines. We're talking about understanding the three uses of the word fair. And then we're going to touch on what an extreme anchor is, loss aversion, and then bending their reality. So we'll get on the first ones here and let's talk about deadlines. So deadlines make people act impulsively. Resist the urge to rush as a deadline approaches. Take advantage of the rush when it's on the other side of the table and share your deadlines information that works against you. Okay. So summarizing, re-articulate meaning of what was just said and acknowledge the underlying emotions expressed equals the paraphrasing and the labeling. Okay. So let's talk to this. Cam had mentioned right as we got on here that the deadlines is something that was good for him. Let's kind of work our way around and see what everybody else thought about this. Cam, what are your thoughts?
I was sharing that, some of you guys know I was retired military, right? And deadlines in the military are just crazy. There's a deadline for everything. And it starts at the highest level, right? And then there's a deadline for that. And of course, the next deadline is 3 days before that. And the next one is 3 days before that. The next one is 3 days. Anyways, by the time it gets to you, it's tomorrow, right? And you're like, no, that doesn't work. Right. So the key here in the book, though, it took me a long time to realize that in the military that, yes, there are deadlines, but the world doesn't end when the deadline is passed. And people will try to use, and even we try to use sometimes in sales deadlines to say, well, I can really only buy one more house this month on the 29th day of the month. Right. So it's that, oh, there's a deadline. Like I got to make a decision with this guy, or he's just not going to buy my house. You know what I mean? That's the sense of urgency that the deadline creates. And it's actually false. It's just something that we all, when placed with a deadline, we as humans, and I think specifically Americans, we have to meet it or we think the world is going to end. And that's just not the case. But people will use it to their advantage, both in sales and not in sales.
Cool. Kaylee, what are your thoughts here?
My first thought was my favorite deadline, and those who live in Hampton Roads will know this deadline. Every weekend, Haynes has a this week only deadline, but it's every weekend. Yep. So that sales technique to rush the urgency. In our case, I think the people that we help legitimately do have deadlines sometimes. So there is sometimes a need to make things happen quickly to avoid a foreclosure or something. So I think there is a place for deadlines sometimes. Myself, I used to work better and be more effective and productive with deadlines, because then it helped me better to prioritize what I needed to do. I can put this off to then blah, blah, blah. But I do agree it could cause people to not see the picture clearly, or you're missing something because you're rushing. And no, the world would not end if you do miss that deadline. However, somebody might lose their house. So I think in this case, there is a place for deadlines in what we do.
Nice. Ashley, how about your side?
Yeah, so I have a lot to say about deadlines. Hold on. Is there feedback on your end, guys? A little bit? Okay. Well, I can't hear it anymore, so I'm just going to keep going. Yeah. So I have a lot about deadlines. They're, like Kaylee said, with stores and everything like that, Hanes is always having this one-time only sale. You see that when you go onto a website to log in or to buy something, and it's like that little countdown clock that says your discount expires in 23 minutes and 12 seconds. And so you're like, oh, I can't contemplate this for a while. I have to do it now. But there's also something to be said where you do need to rush. And sometimes deadlines are important, but also it doesn't have to be, with the exception of like maybe a contract, things don't have to be perfect the first time around. So I think we talked a little bit about this in Traction, where if there's a deadline, if you can just get to that point where maybe the seller, it's like 5:55, you're about to log off, but the seller's expecting a contract, or you need to send something to the attorney. It doesn't have to be the perfect worded addendum or something like that. You just need to get something over to show that you are serious, to show that you're committed to this deal, and show that you're trying to work through it. If something is wrong in the contract, you can fix that later normally. So just making sure, you need to know which deadlines are glass and which ones are plastic. So when you're juggling the balls, you can not drop the glass ones so that they'll break, but you can drop the plastic ones because you can pick them back up later.
I agree. Those are all good calls for the back of the house. On the front side, where we're dealing with sales, I think it's really important to think about using deadlines to your advantage as well as what could possibly be a disadvantage, right? So having your sellers make the clear decision that going with you is the better option for the case of, like Kayla, you said, somebody going into foreclosure, or maybe there's taxes that are coming up due and there's a tax auction sale coming to the table. How does the seller understand that there is a deadline to that? And if there isn't a decision made between today or tomorrow, then something drastic will happen. So I think that's the part of the book or this chapter where it says using the rush of others, or take advantage of the rush of somebody else's scenario, to look at that as where it's going to benefit you, right? Hey, Mr. Seller, if we don't get this handled, let's talk about what's going to happen. Right. So I think that's a big piece of this, where we're talking about paying attention to deadlines and using it to our advantage sometimes. But like Cam says, world's not going to end, but you might lose your home and some money. So all that is to go back into sales side, but talking about the back of the house and how it's used is a massive piece, right?
Well, and I want to say on the sales side too, and back of the house, the combination, on our contracts, we have a little section that says contract is only valid for 5 days. And it tells you the date that it is, the date that it's postmarked. So If I sent a contract today, it would show 11/23, and it would only be valid until 11/28.
Yep.
So we use that even if sometimes we might not be serious. I mean, we're not going to lose a contract because they signed it on the 6th day, but we might be like, well, now we need to resend it and, this and that. And just to give that sense of urgency to the seller, because, well, one of the big things with, if you sign it past 5 days, it throws the closing date off. And so it's a legitimate thing where suddenly you only have 25 days to close as opposed to 30. And those 5 days could be crucial in getting contractors out there, in getting your funding, in anything on the closing side. I mean, 5 extra days on some of these deals would be a godsend, so that I'm not running around like a chicken with my head cut off. So, but it's not always possible.
All right. So I think that'll get us into the next part. So understanding the 3 uses of the word fair. So the word fair is used in negotiation in 3 separate ways. Okay. So as a defensive move, it's used as a nefarious accusation. And then it's used as a positive. So one that I always use this for, and this is where this comes from in my vocabulary and why I do it. Does that sound fair? So that's a big one, right? And it's allowing the opposite person, whoever you're talking to understand the word fair really doesn't have that much of a context statement to it. It depends on how you deliver it, right? Does that sound fair? So, Mr. Seller, sounds like the home needs about $40,000 to $50,000 in repairs. Does that sound fair? And by saying it that way, you've done a little bit of, hey, I'm trying to give you a number, and if not, here's your chance to say no, right? Most of the time, people are not going to go against it unless you deliver it in a different fashion where, let's talk about tax assessment, right? So if the city is not, and this one I get pushed back on all the time, if the city assessment is $150,000 and it assessed for half of that, would you sell it for that amount today? Does that sound fair? Well, no, I wouldn't do that. So it's not fair at all. It had the word fair didn't work there, right? So you see the delivery of how it's being said versus what I'm looking for as a reaction. So it has to be delivered correctly. So as a defensive move, we just want what's fair. What does that mean? Emotionally rattled negotiators will raise their counteroffer. The correct response would be, okay, I apologize. Let's stop everything and go back to where I started treating you unfairly, and let's fix it. That's one of the defensive moves in the word fair. Nefarious accusation. We've given you a fair offer. So the jab meant to distract your attention. The correct response would be fair. It seems like you're ready to provide evidence that supports this. So in a offer situation, it's kind of like what they just said. If I'm trying to put it into a sentence, it's hard because I know that he does it in the chapter of or he does it in the book. I'm trying to think about how he does it because his delivery on it is really good. Let me see. How can I do that one?
That's also a really good opportunity for mirroring. Like if they say we've given you a fair offer, you reply a fair offer. And then you get a little bit more insight into what they are thinking is a fair offer or why they think it's fair.
Yep. That's a good one. It's where it's, so he's talking about this nefarious accusation part. We've given you a fair offer. Also meant, as we said, it's a jab, right? Fair. It seems like you're ready to provide evidence to show that this would be a fair offer. So are you as the seller or the buyer saying like, do you want to show me comps? Do you want to show me why? The only thing I don't like about that is now you've caused confrontation with the seller, and you never want to be confrontational with the seller, right? So I think that understanding this chapter, understanding how to use this, and then the way he delivers it is you got to be very specific with it, because you get to that part of a jab versus a punch. now you're in a confrontation with the seller, and that don't go anywhere positive. All right. So then I keep messing up a screen over here. So here we go.
The positive.
As a positive, I want you to feel like you're being treated fairly at all times. So please stop me at any time if you feel I'm being unfair, and we'll address it immediately. So I think the delivery on that would be when you're talking about how you're getting ready to give an offer, or you're going to go through the conversation of talking to the seller. What does that feel like? What does it look like? Right? How do you say it to where, Mr. Seller, I want to make sure I treat you fairly throughout this entire conversation. So at any point in time that I don't do that, please stop me immediately and let's address it. Right? Then going down your path of, like, talk about the home as like an internal walkthrough or a visual walkthrough, right? So that you can start having that conversation after you've built rapport and after you figured out why they're selling game. So, oh, somehow my thing just quit.
Well, we can all take turns talking about fairness and
how go for it.
you incorporate that. So, Kaylee, why don't you go ahead and start?
Yep, go for it.
Yeah, I'll start with the nefarious accusation. If that's how you approach a seller, you should never be in this business. Because we would never say to a seller, we've given you a fair offer. But we might hear that from a buyer. A buyer gives an offer, and then we're given a counter, and they want to stand strong on what their offer. We might hear it from them, but like Shawn said, you would never say that to a seller. You already failed if you got to that point. I did, Shawn, like how you threw the positive sentences in there before we start doing the virtual property walkthrough. I like that, and I'm going to add that and see how that goes on our calls. I did like that here, and I want you to feel like you're being treated fairly at all times. So please stop me if you feel that I'm not, so we can address it. The defensive move, we would hear this from a seller often. We just want what's fair. I just want what's fair. I kind of think that also plays into, well, what is it that you want to offer? Because they're trying to see if you're going to be fair up front, that kind of thing. So those would be my takes on those fairs. Never use the nefarious one, the positive one of the route to go.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that when we are talking about offers and we are talking to sellers, it's kind of synonymous to use the word reasonable. I hear that all the time. I'll take a reasonable offer. Well, let's see if, what you're offering is reasonable. And I'll always try to break that down, of course, before we talk more to say, well, can you share with me what you think would be reasonable or somewhere around it, right? Because look, I don't want to get to a place where we're in two different places, because I might think something's reasonable. You might think something else is reasonable. So can we talk about that, right? And whenever I end up giving the offer, we finally talk about a number where I'm at, and they say, oh, that's just you're being unreasonable. Okay. I get it. I'm not sure I understand, but I get it. Can you help me understand why that's unreasonable? You know what I mean? Can you help just so I understand, you know what I mean? If nothing else. So that's kind of how I use some of the things here. And I do use the word fair in the same way that sometimes Ashley uses make sense. I use make sense as well too. So, I'd like to, take a virtual walkthrough of the house, kind of talk to you about some of the conditions of the house, and, the reason I'm going to do that, so I can kind of figure out how much money I need to put into it so I can make an offer. Does that sound fair? And you could say, does that make sense? It's the same thing, right? But that's another way that I use fair every day, honestly. So those are the ones where I would usually, and I agree with Kaylee on this nefarious. I'm not sure how we would ever use that productively. We might use that unproductively and get hung up on, but other than that, I'm not sure how you would use it productively.
Awesome. Ashley, how does this work on your side?
Yeah. Well, I don't like the word fair at all. And I think it's because my grandpa drummed into my head, life isn't fair. And he was always like, don't say the F word, which always meant fair and not the other F word. So to me, I don't know. I don't like it. And so I prefer, like Cam said, using something similar to reasonable. Is this reasonable? Because I think it's hard to make things fair on either side. Nothing is ever going to be fair. Someone is always going to have some kind of advantage or disadvantage. And so, and I know that the sellers are often going to feel like that because the people that we work with probably don't have a lot of choices. They might be close to having their house foreclosed on. They might be close to having it taken away because they can't pay taxes. Or a lot of code issues, probate situation where they can't keep it like they maybe wanted to. There are a lot of things where they're already coming from not a bad place, but they feel like they're coming from a disadvantage. And so being fair is not necessarily going to help with that. On my side, I think what comes to mind the most is when it comes to HUDs and closings, because every now and then something will pop up. We'll need to file an additional list of heirs. We'll need to send a mobile notary somewhere. And it sort of is a case-by-case basis. If the sellers, because technically it's their responsibility for all of this, but if you can tell, or I can tell that they feel like they've been beaten down through this whole process, sometimes I'll just write it off on ours and say, take it out of ours. Here, I'll write you a check to our attorney, do what you need to do and we'll take care of it. We don't need to be reimbursed. So just trying to create that sense of fairness or that balancing act so that they feel like they are being listened to, they are being heard.
Awesome. That's a really good way of hearing the difference between the back of the house and how the word fair plays in versus in the sales side. So that's an awesome feedback. Everybody hear the word that we're going to use with Ashley from now
The F word.
on? Love it. All right, let's keep moving. So let's get to what would be an extreme anchor. This is bending your counterpart's reality by anchoring the starting point. Before making an offer, emotionally anchor by saying how bad it will be. Set an extreme anchor to make my real number seem reasonable. Use a range to seem less aggressive. So this is what I want to play in, or this is what I feel like we play in all the time when we talk about anchors, right? So, Mr. Seller, you've gone through the question of what they want. They give you the number, and you come back with the, man, it just sounds really high. And I think my offer is going to be really low. But let's just say I came in at like $40,000, right? And they're asking 150, and your number is probably somewhere between 70 and 80. Okay. So there's a low anchor there, right? And it's not where you're going to get to, but it's in their head, right? It's a statement and it's a low number, and they're like, whoa, they're really just pushed back off of it. But then you come up, right? You come up to a number that's way better than what you anchored at. And that's a really good example of what that sounds like and looks like, so that the seller doesn't get bowled over, right? This is a really good one that we use a lot. Everybody in our team on the sales side uses it. It's pretty much part of the script that we use as far as like dropping an anchor to make sure that people know that that's not the number. And it sounds better because you're coming up higher than the number you originally offered, right? So extreme anchors are really, really good. The part that they talk about saying this ahead of time versus how are they going to make it an emotional anchor. I don't think we talk about an emotional side of this as much as we do expectation wise, right? So to a number, you say $40,000, they're at 150, you can probably be at 70, 80. So you come up a little bit higher after you talk back and forth to it. So I think this is a really good one. I really enjoy this one. Can you talk to your part of it, Cam?
Yeah, so two things come to mind here. One with the buyer and one with the seller. So I'll start with the buyer. So, or no, sorry, with the seller. Actually, they're both for sellers. I guess it relates. Man, I'm going in circles here. So recently we had a house that had extreme termite damage under it, right? And that bill ended up coming back to about 10 grand, right? So I know that in a house that size, that's about pretty high bill for fixing termite issues, adjusting the flooring issues, leveling the house out, replacing some subflooring, right? That's on the higher side, right? 10 grand. Of course, it can get worse than that, but let's not say the house is falling in. So now we are currently working on a house where there were some more issues, but it was kind of uncertain of how much they would be, right? So when we talked to the seller about what that would look like before we went in and because this was all unknown. Before we went and saw the house, there was no signs of anything going on underneath the house. When I had pre-conversations with the seller, right, set the anchor of, look, we had one similar to this. I mean, similar square footage, similar make, right? And that was over 10 grand, just around like 10 grand in repairs. So I'm not saying that's what it's going to be, but I want to prepare you for that. Now, as it turns out, it's about 5. So now when we go back and talk about 5, well, that's a lot easier to hear when you heard 10 last week. So that's one way for sure to set that expectation so that the real pill is not as hard to swallow or talk about. The other one that I always use is when you're going through and talking with the seller about maybe what you might be able to spend on the house. Of course, you're going to look in the neighborhood and start pulling your comps, and you're going to talk about that. I'm looking for a similar year built, similar square footage, and then I'm looking for the bottom sale, right? The one in the neighborhood that sold for $27,000. That's the one I want to find, right? And it's similar, and I want to bring that up because I want to say to everybody, or I want to say to the seller, right? Well, I see right here, I got one very similar to yours. Honestly, it's about 3 blocks away, sold for $27,000. Okay, let's see what else we got, and just drop that and just pause for a minute, right? And let them understand that wait, there's a similar house 3 blocks from me that sold for 27 grand. Damn, I hope this guy isn't gonna come in at 27 grand. Like, I'm gonna hang up the phone. So that's, one way to set that anchor without even truly talking about their specific house. And you're just talking to the bottom of the market that's there. That's definitely a house you're going to consider, because as we look to take down a property, wholesale a property, we would definitely look at what things are being bought for cash sale in that area. So that's a way that I always use Extreme Anchor on almost every call. As long as we get to the part where we're talking about numbers, I'm using Anchor somewhere.
Awesome. Kaylee.
Yeah. So with the emotional anchor, and Shawn, you do this and you didn't even realize you did it, but when you first said, that's kind of high, our number is going to be low, that's the emotional anchor, setting the standards, putting out the bad first. So I know that we do this, or we say, I don't think my number is going to be anywhere near that. So that's, putting the bad out first. And just like everyone said, throwing out the low number for the reaction, and then being able to come back with a higher number to make the seller, feel better about moving forward. I do like the use of the range in this. And I've heard Jacob use the range before. So I do like the use of the range to give them an idea. In the book, it says the range that you give it would be the low number is where you would want to be, but in our way, I guess it would be vice versa. It would be reverse in our way. So we give a low number, and that the higher range is kind of closer to what our number would be. But yeah, I think I will start using a range when giving numbers.
Awesome. Ashley, does this work on your side of the house at all?
Yeah. So I think on my end, it's more with buyers or occasionally with sellers. And again, it's at the closing table or shortly before, where they'll come to me and say something like, oh, how much are closing costs going to be, or something like that. And I think, honestly, it was never conscious of me. I think it was more, I would rather give them a high number and then it be lower. Of like, okay, closing costs are going to cost $5,000, and then suddenly it comes back and it costs $3,000, and it's like, oh yeah, I got you this deal, we convinced them, blah blah blah, and then it's like, oh, see, closing with them was easy, they dropped the cost down, like definitely want to buy from them later. And it's sort of just something that I think people do, but you don't realize it. And bringing up Jacob again, this would have been a great one for him to be on, because one of the things that he says is, I don't want to insult you by giving you this offer. And I think that's really good, because I think that adds the emotional part to it, where he's kind of like, it's a low offer, and I know it's low, but that's kind of where we're at. And it just kind of connects it, because he humanizes himself a little bit by doing that, and humanizes the seller, because sometimes things get so oppositional, people forget that both sides are just trying to do their job. Whether the seller, it's their own house or they're selling it for someone else, they're just trying to do what they can to get the best price for them. And we can't be upset with them for that, because that's exactly what we're doing too.
Yep. Good stuff. Good stuff all the way around.
Yeah.
All right. The next one is, actually, you said you want to take a break for a second?
Yeah. So because this chapter has turned out to be a little bit longer, I think we've been recording for 30 minutes already, or almost. We're going to take a break and stop it right here, and then come back, and you guys will get the rest of chapter 6 next week. So thanks again for listening to Never Split the Difference, chapter 6, part 1. If you have enjoyed this podcast or any of our podcast episodes or YouTube episodes, please leave us a review on any of the platforms. Let us know how we can help you in the future, or what you've liked hearing about in the past, about traction, Never Split the Difference, wholesaling out of the box, anything like that. So thanks guys for listening or watching, and we'll see you next time.